Well, welcome to Music Appreciation. This particular week we talk about tragedy and emotionalism in the 19th century. And to start things off, we're going to go with it's kind of a bit of a longer piece of music, but in reality, as you're going to find out as I talk about different music, it's actually kind of short. This is about a 12-minute piece of music, and it's by Claude Debussy. It's the Prelude, l'après-midi d'un faun, or Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. I hope you enjoy it, and I want you to pay careful attention of when the conductor comes through the orchestra, and maybe some of the routines that you see, and then we'll talk about it. That's a beautiful piece of music by Claude Debussy, and it was written in 1894, which really is representative of the end of the Romantic era. And so we're going to talk a lot about the Romantic era today, but before we do that, I want to talk just a little bit about the philosophy of music that's coming about in this time. Everything is happening differently now. This is the age of enlightenment. And so with that, music changes dramatically from the classical music realm. And very interestingly, I've enjoyed reading your music reviews on classical music. And I bet up until this point, most of you have thought of all of this music fitting into classical music. But remember, the classical period is a short period throughout all of this kind of music. And so now we are into romantic music. And next week, we'll get into 20th century music, which really changes things. But we're going to see how that change starts to come about even now with, first of all, music really wasn't discussed philosophically much since Plato. So we have the arousal theory of music and the sympathy theory. Plato decided that music, and we're talking different scales within music, different modes, would create a very set pattern of emotion. And in fact, this whole concept was called the doctrine of ethos. And the Greeks used it to train their warriors, that they would play like certain modes of music to make their warriors a little bit more enraged, a little bit even stronger or more fierce. This is the sympathy theory. And then, and this was like 300 BC. And then René Descartes wrote a book that changed a lot of stuff. It was the name of the book was The Passions of the Soul, and he created this theory back in around 1620, this physiological theory that music would create one of 6 emotions: wonder, love, hatred, desire, joy, or sadness. And really, this theory was adopted by all the composers of the day, including Bach and Handel. Both wrote short treatises on René Descartes' physiological theory. Now, the thing I want you to see here is really from 300 BC till 1620 AD, which is a very long span of really 1,300 years or so. Plato's concepts were not even questioned. The whole doctrine of ethos, the idea that a certain scale of music could create a particular passion, was not even questioned. Then René Descartes, with his physiological theory, said, not so much that music can arouse one of these 6 different feelings or expressions. Then it's going to be another really 200 years before we see music discussed again philosophically. And with this, we're going to see music elevated as art. At this point, it is still kind of a utility. It's a utility either ecclesiastically for the church, or it's a utility to communicate, say, folk songs. It's a utility to create a specific emotion. But when we have the writings of philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer and Edward Hanslick, we're going to see that the concept of music is raised. Arthur Schopenhauer said in his book, The World as Will and Idea, where he talks about the full range of human emotions. He talks about music, and he says, music is emotional in virtue of its representational power, but not emotionally moving and arousing whatever emotion or emotions it represented. What Schopenhauer is doing is he's saying, listen, music is bigger than just a utility. Music is something that can do that, but that's not its chief aim. And so that first revolution in 1819 was huge. And then the second revolution in 1854 by Edward Hanslick, we're going to see even more so and more finite that music's sole purpose is not to arouse emotion. He says that music as an art cannot arouse or represent what he calls garden variety emotions. For instance, you can't write a piece of music just to make me happy, because I may not assign happiness with that kind of music. You can write a piece of music that sounds happy in nature, but that's not what it will do. Therefore, it cannot be the sole or primary purpose of music as an art to arouse or represent the garden variety emotions. You don't have to remember too much of this, for the final. I just want you to understand that these two philosophers, they were key in helping launch a new understanding of music, that it's more than just a utility. And so again, that's Schopenhauer and Hanslick. Now we're going to see the third and the fourth revolution take place in the 20th century. And that's how we'll open up next week's video. We'll talk a little bit about that. And so I do want to share with you, when we think about this final exam and we're starting to get closer and closer to that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to watch the videos that I produce and read the materials and watch the Howard Goodall videos, and those are going to be your three sources of information. Then the final exam will be an open book exam that will last 59 minutes, and it will be online, and you'll take that exam online, open book. So you may even want to go back over the videos and just take notes and make sure you're doing due diligence. Make sure you've got that stuff remembered. As far as the book stuff is concerned, honestly, I'm not going to get into finite details. So it should be something that should be quickly looked up. So let's talk about romantic music. Romantic music spans the time from 1820 to 1900. And like anything else in life, it's not hard and defined. That we have a transitional composer who transitions us from classical to romantic, and that's Ludwig van Beethoven. He's followed, and one of his contemporaries really is Johannes Brahms. Brahms is going to be probably the stalwart of the romantic era of music. Someone who can be studied very, very thoroughly to understand romantic music. And his times are 1833 through 1897. Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and by the way, his last name, understand that it comes from Cyrillic. It's spelled in Russian, so we have a kind of a phonetic pronunciation of his name. So that's why you see so many different spellings of his last name. So don't get too hung up if you see it spelled one way or spelled a different way. Sometimes the V is a W, sometimes the Y is an I, and so forth. But he would be writing a lot of orchestral pieces as well, and really a lot of ballets, things like Swan Lake and the Nutcracker, that you're probably pretty familiar with. A Scandinavian composer really gives rise toward the end of the Romantic period with nationalistic music, and his name is Edvard Grieg, from 1843 to 1907, and he would write the Peer Gynt Suite, which would be highly nationalistic, about a Scandinavian folk hero or anti-hero named Peer Gynt. And then Giacomo Puccini would be hugely responsible for writing a lot of ballets and some opera as well. And then Claude Debussy in 1862 to 1918, which you just heard his prelude on the Afternoon of a Faun. By the way, in hearing that, I wanted to bring a couple of things to your attention. The conductor of the orchestra was a guy by the name of Valery Gurdjieff, and this was the National Youth Orchestra of the United States. He was the guest conductor for that, but he is the music director and conductor for the London Symphony Orchestra currently. And you'll notice he came down and walked through the orchestra, at which point they stood, which is a normal thing that orchestras do when the conductor walks in, is they stand in honor of the conductor. Then you'll notice that he shook hands with a young lady, and she would be called the concertmaster. The first violinist of any orchestra is typically the concertmaster. He shakes her hand, and that is also part of the routine and decorum in an orchestra setting. Because the concertmaster has so much to do with the performance of the orchestra, they write in the bowings, they handle different aspects and issues with the string section of the orchestra. So in a lot of ways, they are the assistant conductor of the group. And so it is typical that the conductor will shake hands with the concertmaster before he seats the orchestra. He seats the orchestra, they perform, and they had other pieces to perform. If not, at the end of the piece, when people are clapping once again, he would acknowledge the concertmaster and shake their hand. So let's talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution, because this has a huge impact on Romantic music as well. So the Industrial Revolution, what we have is bigger is better and more is better. The Industrial Revolution brings to music, we take the music out of the churches and we put them in larger venues, larger halls. The Industrial Revolution also allowed us to mass produce instruments with regulation dimensions. All of a sudden we have violinists who are all playing on violins which are all built in the same exact dimension. So in essence, you could pick up any violin and play it in tune in theory. These mass-produced instruments also allowed more people to be able to play instruments. You have new instruments, such as the tuba and the saxophone. The saxophone, not necessarily an orchestral instrument, but you do have these instruments introduced into the setting of the orchestra. You also have the piston valve, which is something that you see on trumpets, and in just a moment you're going to watch a video on did biblical trumpets have valves. And in that video it's something that I put together to explain why sometimes when we think of the trumpet in the Old and New Testament, we think of something that has valves, but it really doesn't. The valve is not created until the 1800s, and what it does is it allows the brass player to play different instruments. I'm sorry I had to move because my computer is starting to run out of energy, and so I have to plug up. Then also what we have is we have a dynamic range because of the Industrial Revolution, because of these instruments being mass-produced and they're built to regulation specifications. They give us a dynamic range. What I mean by dynamic range is we go from very soft to very loud. And so if you will look at this screen, you see a piece of music. It says epilogue lent, which means slow. It says quarter note is 76 beats per minute. But then you see PP. I have it circled, and that's pianissimo. That's really, really soft. And then the other things you see circled is you see what looks to be alligator mouths, one opening, or you could even look at it as a lesser than and then a greater than symbol. And that's a crescendo and a decrescendo, respectively. Crescendo meaning getting louder and decrescendo meaning getting softer. So these dynamic ranges, I'll go over them with you because the quietest you can be is pianissimo, which is very quiet. Now, every once in a while in a piece of music, you'll see like 4 Ps or 5 Ps, and that's just the composer just really just saying, okay, it's even quieter than quiet, you know, and they have that ability to do that. And then you have PP, which is pianissimo, then P, which is piano, MP, which is mezzo piano, or kind of quiet. That leads to MF, which is mezzo forte, or kind of loud. Forte is loud, fortissimo is louder still, and then fortissimo is really, really loud. And so you have these dynamic ranges which take place in the orchestra. The orchestras themselves, they grow quite larger, with orchestras going, instead of having an orchestra of around 40, you now have orchestras of 60, 80, 100, 120. You with Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique, you have these huge orchestras. And then you have operas becoming amazing. With you know, the opera was basically, it would tell a musical tale and it had action along with it, but all of a sudden this action is now much bigger on a much more grand scale. I mean, it's kind of like comparing you know, the 1960s Star Wars with, or rather 1960s Star Trek with the, you know, the Force Awakens now, with the different kinds of graphics and CGI. Everything is bigger. Everything is much more expansive. Just to give you an idea, I mean, we have two opera composers that are really big in this time period. One is Giuseppe Verdi, who he is still writing in the classical style, though his music is much more romantic in nature. But the guy that kind of blows it out of the water is this German composer named Richard Wagner. And Richard Wagner would be just this hallmark composer for the opera. And really, opera has never caught up with what he has done since. You know, it's this was the heyday of the opera. He wrote, I think it was like 25 operas. He wrote several operas, but he wrote this one Ring Cycle opera. And it's 4 operas in one. It's also called The Ring der Nibelung. And it was performed first at the Bayreuth Festival there in Germany. And it's still performed, or at Vienna, and it's still performed there like about every 5 years. And it takes around 3 days to perform. It's 4 operas back to back as it's supposed to be performed, and it's just massive, really kind of over the top massive. So with romantic music, one of the things that we have to understand is that we have 2 kinds of romantic music. And if we'll go back to the writings of Schopenhauer and Hanslick for just a minute, they describe music as being art in and of itself. It's no longer this utilitarian concept. So with this, we have 2 different philosophies. We have pure music and we have programmatic music. Pure is music for music's sake. And it may be, for instance, I think some of you wrote in your music reviews on Beethoven's Symphony No. 9. Well, there wasn't an idea that Beethoven was trying to get across. He wasn't trying to tell a specific story with this piece of music. He just wrote Symphony No. 9. However, in programmatic music, there is a telling of a story, a representation. And the idea is that the music kind of gives you the different scenes. To do this, they have to create elements for different people. Now, as I talked about Wagner, for instance, he did something called the Leitmotif, which would be a representation of each person in the opera musically. And the best way that I can describe this, and again I go back to Star Wars, is if you think about Darth Vader. Every time Darth Vader enters the scene in any of the movies, you have this bum 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 bum. Well, that's it. Wagner would call that the leitmotif of Darth Vader. We typically call it motif, which is the same idea. The French called it the idée fixe, which we see that in Berlioz, Hector Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique, when it's this musician artist who is in this opiate dream, and he's thinking about this beautiful woman, and she keeps coming back in all five of the movements of this piece of music in a different way, and so you hear this idée fixe being developed, but you hear that same person each time. And so it's programmatic music kind of gives us the opportunity to see what the composer's really thinking, and for that person, that composer, to give us a story, to give us a tale. So what I want you to do is I'm going to play something for you. It takes about, I think it's 5 minutes, and it's something I put together, and it's called Did the Trumpet in the Bible Have Valves? And I kind of throw that out to you as I've been doing something about the different families of instruments each video, and this one really kind of describes to you very quickly why the trumpets in the Bible didn't have valves and why they have valves today. So we're going to watch that, and then after that I'll give you your assignment for discussion board. So, today's theological question. Did the trumpets in the Bible have valves?
No!
Okay, wait. That's probably a correct answer, but let's explain. The instrumental piston valve was invented by musician gadgeteer Heinrich Stölzl in 1818. That's AD. And the canonization of the Bible, though going through different phases, finally settled at about 400 again AD. So 1818 minus 400 yields a discrepancy of over 1400 years. So the answer is
no!
So if that's the case, what did the trumpets from back then look like, especially in the Old Testament? There were two trumpets referred to in the Old Testament, the shofar and the hatzotzera. The shofar was a horn made of the horn of a kudu, antelope, or ibex, but not of a cow, because of the golden calf debacle in Exodus 32. The material is keratin, and it's the same material as your fingernail.
Come on.
The shofar is usually long and curvy and hollowed out with holes at both ends. One to let the sound out, and the other as sort of a mouthpiece. And the tones produced are low, 3, maybe 4. It could be played by anyone back in the day, and it was used for signaling. At Jubilee, before the dispersion of the Jews, or the diaspora, for a whole year, everyone could play a shofar. The other trumpets, the hatzotzera, or what we know as the silver trumpets, were only played by the Levitical priests, and it has the distinction of being described in usage in Numbers chapter 10. Again, a few notes could only be played, and this was for ceremony and liturgical purposes. So, back to the original question. If these trumpets had no valves, how do you play them? Well, a great comparison is the bugle. With no valves, there is a great limit on the possible notes to be played, but different notes can be played by lip and air speed and tongue placement inside the mouth. Until the piston valve, this was the method. Trumpeters actually had crooks, which were tubing additions that they could add to the length or the horn to change the key. Oh, wait, what about the New Testament, you ask? Well, in the New Testament, there was a generic Greek term for trumpet called salpinx. They were long, straight tubes, often weighing up to 20 pounds. They were extremely common, so common in fact that the early Olympics had contests to see who could play them the longest. A guy named Achaeus won Olympic contests 3 times, starting in 396 BC, for his extensive lung capacity. So, in review, shofar, ram's horn, hatzotzera, silver trumpet, salpinx, generic New Testament trumpet. Oh,
By the way, do you know who played the first shofar in the Bible?
No!
God. In Exodus 19:16, at Mount Sinai, the Hebrews were all waiting to hear from God. And it says, "On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled." So next time you hear the trumpet, see a trumpet, or play a trumpet, thank God for valves.
So your discussion board for today is finding a leitmotif or a motif or a idée fixe. In a movie or TV show, I want you to find a character that has a musical motif with his character when he enters. And then I want you to post a link of that from YouTube and the time in the video that the motif occurs. I had used a Star Wars excerpt before. The Darth Vader theme is well known, but it also occurs many times with a little more subtlety. For instance, in this video, the moment Anakin becomes Darth Vader is a prime example. If you go to the link that I have posted here, and I'll have it posted on the discussion board as well, so you can try it out and see what I mean, you'll hear the motif for Darth Vader in 1 minute and 41 seconds into this video. Now, this is going to take a little doing, but I think you can do just fine in it. One thing, I'm not going to require you to respond to this discussion board, just because there's probably not a lot you would need to respond to. Give you some ideas. Check out Disney movies. A lot of your Disney movies have leitmotifs that occur. Rocky. In fact, that one's so obvious, I'm going to take that one out. Sorry. Indiana Jones. You can check out Pirates of the Caribbean. Lord of the Rings is a great example. It is just has a whole bunch of different leitmotifs. The Godfather is another one. Harry Potter. Just there are so many movies. James Bond. Okay, I may take that one away too. That's a little obvious, but you get the idea. Find something, and I'm going to score you well if you find it, but I may give you extra points for, or at least higher points for finding something that's a little more vague and obscure. I'm going to have to be able to identify it, so make sure that you give me that link and give me the time, and I'll check it out, because I'm curious too. I want to see what you find. Well, that's it for this week, and I hope that 4th of July week went well for you, and we're getting close. Well, we're getting closer and closer to the end of this class, and I hope you're enjoying it. Take care, and God bless.